Good morning to you. Thank you so much for staying on the AM show. It's now time to move on with our second big story, and it's about the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources scaling up its fight against galamsey. Now, the ministry is asking all owners, operators, and all users of excavators in the country to register their excavators with their MMDCEs within 7 days, and they have to do it in that jurisdiction where the excavator is located. Today, we'll discuss this with Dr. John Osai Kwapong. He's a CDD fellow, and Dr. Steve Mantiao, a policy analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining the program. Let me start with you, Dr. Steve Mantiao. There have been calls for government to be more pragmatic in our steps against the fight against galamsey. What would you say about this latest measure? Hello, Dr. Mantiao.
You hear me?
Right, I can.
Good.
I hope you got my question.
Yeah, I did.
Great.
I heard it. Well, I think the latest development is an attempt to provide legislative backing for some additional action in the fight against galamsey, and I think it's in the right direction. Much as we are all incensed by this menace, it is important that whatever we do actually is done in accordance with law. And so seeking to provide legislative backing for a planned action is the right thing to do. With that said, I'm at a loss as to what happened to some amendments that were done to the regulations at the beginning of the year. I think the current regulations require that prior to even importing equipment for the purposes of mining, especially in this case excavators, you are required to seek prior permission from the Minister of Transport, who then also confers with the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources before granting the permit for you to import the equipment into the country. Now, once the equipment arrives, it is supposed to be registered right at the port, and a tracking system provided for it, so that the equipment is able to track the equipment within the country. But way back in July, I think the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources informed us that the control room for tracking the excavators was going to be ready soon. But it looks like we all went to sleep. We haven't heard anything about this tracking system. How is it being enforced? Have there been infractions? What is the success story? For me, it is this messaging that would actually deter people from engaging in the illegality that we are seeking to curb. If, for instance, you have a tracking system and you are giving feedback to the public in terms of how well it is working and how people are being punished for flouting the regulations, how many excavators are being seized and confiscated, and the rest, then, of course, you are sending a clear message that you are intolerant of the illegality in the ASM sector. But this is not the case. We haven't heard anything, and suddenly we have a new ally going through, which is also seeking to register. But on this occasion, at the local level, it creates some kind of confusion, which I think needs to be sorted out.
It's interesting that you bring the previous measure, which has to deal with the tracking right at the importation stage. One may say that this new measure is to deal and track excavators that are already or that existed prior to the introduction of that law. Let me go to Dr. Kwapong now. Doc, we've been having this conversation for a very long time about the fight against galamsey and government putting in realistic measures. Would you call this one of them?
Well, good morning. I think that anything that chips away at the way this galamsey thing is done is always a step in the right direction, right? We've seen how highly mechanized galamsey operations have become over the last, several years. And so if it's been identified that the use of these excavators for illegal mining activities is one of the things that we must clamp down on, then I think it's a step in the right direction. We have to remember that we tried the seizing of excavators not too long ago as part of the fight, against Galamsey, and that, in my estimation, at the end of the day, did not yield the sort of positive benefits that we were expecting to. But in this case, if it's been determined that if you bring in an excavator to say you're going to use it for purpose X, then we should be able to monitor, track, and ensure that you are using it for that purpose and not for another purpose. So I think we would have to wait and see, one, the extent of compliance with this new directive that gives owners of excavators that 7-day ultimatum to register with their MMDA, specify exactly why you have one, what you use it for. I'm just curious to see that once the registration process is completed, what monitoring mechanisms would be in place to ensure that, let's say, if I, John, registered my excavator for purpose A, and then I turn around and use it for a totally different purpose, how how the MMDAs, because I'm assuming that once you are registering in your local government jurisdiction, they would have primary responsibility for tracking, monitoring, and enforcement. So I'll be curious to see what sort of mechanisms would be used to ensure that if you came to register your excavator for a particular purpose, that is precisely the purpose to which you're putting your excavator. And then if you also don't go and register, what are the consequences for failing to register within a 7-day period?
Dr. Steve Mantiao, when he raises concerns about the communications thereafter, for example, so the tracking devices placed on excavators that are brought into the country, how many people or how many excavators have been tracked? What have we observed? Some will suggest that for security reasons, it may be inappropriate to let us in as the general public on all of this. What are your quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I share those concerns. If really there are some security reasons at stake, then you have to be very careful in how you manage that information and how much of that information then gets shared with the public, right? At least if the public is in the know that, look, we are making sure that we are on top of the use of these excavators for other purposes besides that which it was brought into the country and sent to a particular jurisdiction. I think that's again that's positive, but the whole security concerns and ensuring that you also don't do anything that has unintended consequences, I think are very legitimate concerns to be raised.
So I'm looking at the press statement released by the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, and I'm seeing the third point on steps to follow when it comes to registration of the excavators. And it says an owner, operator, and/or user of an excavator shall, at the time of registration, specify the purpose for which the excavator is being used or to be used and the area where the excavator is being used or will be used as the case may be. So let's take a scenario, and this is for you, Dr. Kwapong and Dr. Mantiao. You'd answer one after the other. I have seen construction firms move from one area to the other. Sometimes they use these excavators for digging, for dugouts and other purposes on construction sites. Here, we are being told that the purpose should be given as at the time of registration and for what purpose as well. Would you say that this is restrictive? Does the policy, as stated in this statement, give reason for you to worry about some of these intricacies within the space? Let me start with you, Dr. Mantia.
I wouldn't see this as restricted. This is the normal practice, even in respect of automobiles. You bring in a car today and you intend to use it for a private purpose, as a private transport. At some point, when you decide to use it for commercial purposes, you go to the DVLA to effect a change of use. So I do not see any particular problem with it. It could be that, look, at the time you brought it in and at the time of registration, it was purposely for mining. If later you decide that you want to change the use to, let's say, construction, I do not see how you cannot go back to the assembly to inform them and get the appropriate approval.
Right. For you, Dr. Kwapong.
Dr. Mantia's sentiments as well. I'm also wondering if in the registration process, particularly given the scenario that you created, right, that let's say for a construction firm or for someone who may use an excavator for legitimate multiple purposes, I'm wondering if in the registration process, you'll be allowed to say, I have these 3 different excavators. I use one to dig boreholes. I use another one to dig dugouts. I use another one for my construction sites where I build houses, for example. Then, or even if it's a single excavator for multiple purposes, maybe there'll be an opportunity to do that. If you use it for a single purpose and at some point you change your mind that I'm going to now use the excavator for something else, again, I'm sure that in the whole administrative process setup that you'll be able to go back to the MMDA and re-register. And again, you would have to indicate why that change of purpose. Because I think in all of this, the effort here is to ensure that the excavators are being used for legitimate economic activity and not being diverted to these galamsey sites.
It'll be great to hear from the ministry on whether such processes exist, especially about the use. A construction company will still indicate that this excavator is being used for construction purposes, but about the location of use, that's where there may be an issue. But hopefully, as the days go by, we may be able to get a response from the ministry. So, since we started this recent conversation about illegal mining and our fight against this, there have been those who said blame the president for not putting his presidency on the line, as he said. There are those who say blame chiefs. There are those who bring it to the doorstep of local government. Would you say that involving the MMDAs in particular in this process is decentralizing the fight enough, Dr. Kwapong?
Yes, and in fact, I think that sometimes, given the nature of a particular public problem that you're dealing with, you want to place it primarily on the doorsteps of your unit of government that is closest to the problem. So if you look at the nature of galamsey, so yes, it's very important that the president, sets the policy priority, gives the strong signal that we will fight this. It's very important that the ministry would also put in a policy, legal framework, and all of that. But I think if you look at exactly where the galamsey problem occurs, the role of the local government becomes very, very critical. And so for me, giving them more power, strengthening their hands to be able to really fight this menace is a step in the right direction.
And Dr. Steve Mantia, would you say that this sort of boosts the confidence of MMDCs? I remember we spoke to one of them, Mr. Bonzo, who had a bit of an issue with the police when it came to some excavators that were being used, according to him, for illegal mining purposes. I'm sure you followed that story. Would you say that this directive by the Ministry of Lands gives them some sort of power if at any point they felt that they were being left out in the fight?
These have always been involved in the permitting processes for the purposes of mining. In fact, there are rules that require that they place notice of intent to grant any lease on their notice boards and all that. So they've been involved. Again, if you consider the fact that they are the representatives of the president at the local level and they are the development agents. So, of course, they already do have some powers and responsibilities at the local level. And so if they are not aware, then that is unfortunate. Now, I do not see how these new regulations give them or boost their confidence, because it is not too clear from the draft legislation that we've seen what new powers are being given the MMDC. They are only supposed to register and ensure that all the excavators in their jurisdiction are known and recorded. And that is that. It doesn't give them any powers to do anything beyond the registration. And that is why I do not see how that can boost their confidence. Again, I think that if we're not careful, we'll rather be complicating the problem we are trying to deal with. Because now, the MMDCs, and from the LI, that's the impression I get, the registration is going to be done manually, but there's no indication that there's going to be an electronic database. So it raises the question as to how you monitor compliance. Because look, if you are going to, on the basis of the registration, create an electronic database so that when inspectors move to the field and they find a particular excavator with a particular registration number, they can actually key in the registration number into the database for confirmation as to whether this particular excavator is registered or not. And therefore, you are moving a step further in terms of ensuring compliance and ridding the sector of illegal or unauthorized excavators that are committing illegality in the mining sector. So I think that the regulations really is not exhaustive in terms of dealing with the issue comprehensively at the local level.
So what do you think government can do to deal with it comprehensively at the local level?
Precisely the point I make, that, look, there was a time I was in Shama. This was years ago, about 6, 7, 8 years ago. I was in Shama, and the communities reported to me that there was some small-scale mining going on in the district, but they are not too sure whether it's legal or illegal. At the time, the Deputy Inspector of Mines at the Minerals Commission was a friend. I served with him on a committee. So I just picked the phone and called him, and then he checked and then gave me feedback immediately, and I informed the community. There's a way in which, by automating the search, we are able to actually, at the local level, confirm whether whatever activity is being undertaken by any person is lawful or unlawful. And so what we need, and I think the Minerals Commission has the responsibility to do that. They have a mining cadastral system, and if they can incorporate into that cadastral system all the mining leases, small scale, large scale, I know they have the large scale, I'm not too sure about the small scale, so that if I find a particular activity, there should be a code that I can just key in to confirm whether that activity is lawful or unlawful. Same with the excavators. If we are going to register, then let's create a database that enables people, or inspectors, regulators, whoever, even the assembly itself, to confirm from the field. It may be in the field, but by keying the code, the registration code of the excavator, they should be able to confirm whether it's lawful and in the right location it's supposed to be or not.
Right. Doc, we'll quickly be wrapping up this conversation, but in doing so, I'd just like to throw in, I don't know if any of you have been following what's happening in court with regards to the Aisha 1 case, but we were in court yesterday, and a bail application by her lawyer was dismissed again. The judge, at the initial one, said that she was flight risk, and yesterday her lawyers were trying to apply again, and she said she wasn't going to change her stance on that. What are your quick thoughts on the case as it's developing? Hello, Dr. Steve Mantiao.
Well, yes, I think this Aisha 1 case has taken, unfortunately, a political twist. And in that context, there is a high likelihood that she may suffer some injustice. As we all put a very high premium on the case and expect a certain outcome. And so the trial judge then will be finding himself under some duress to deliver the expected public outcome. And for me, that is rather unfortunate. I would rather that all criminal cases related to infraction of our mining rules in this country are taken to due process without the fanfare and without the circle, such that people get to go through a very fair process and suffer whatever consequences the law provides that they suffer. Currently, as I say, I'm at a loss as to whether or not, and the guarantees that this person will get a very fair trial. I mean, if you look at the call for all the evidences and wherever that the Attorney General intends to tender for this prosecution, then of course we're making it more like a treason trial and not really like just a day-to-day violations or infractions of our law.
Right. I appreciate your thoughts here. Dr. Steve Mantiao is a policy analyst. Let me wrap up with you, Dr. Kwapong. Very interesting perspective that Dr. Steve Mantiao brings on board. Throughout this conversation, you appear to share his sentiments. Do you share this one as well?
Well, let's give the court the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I can see why he would have those concerns that, look, this has become a very high-profile case. If you look at the public commentary that greeted the news that she was back in the country and engaged in the very illegal activity for which she was either deported or was supposed to have left the country, etc., etc. I can see why Dr. Mantiao would say, look, the trial judge may even be under pressure to make sure that nothing is done that would incur the displeasure of the public. Because I think this is one case that the public's interest in it is very high. And I think the public is expecting a particular outcome. And any other outcome besides that which the public is expecting will generate some serious political backlash. And again, so I can see where Dr. Mantiao is coming from. I want to give the court the benefit of the doubt to say that if you look at all of the circumstances surrounding this person, between the prior arrest and whether she fled, whether she was deported, how she got back into the country, etc., etc., I can see why there's that hesitation to move ahead with granting a bail application, unless some serious sureties are guaranteed.
Right. Thank you so much for your time this morning as well. Dr. John Osai Kwapong is a CDD fellow. We've been discussing the latest move by the Ministry of Lands to deal with the illegal mining menace. It says that it's given a 7-day grace period for persons who own or use excavators to register them with the local assemblies that they belong to. And they're supposed to provide the chassis number where they're going to use the excavators, and a host of others. Let me just run you through them if you're not aware. So the name and particulars of the owner of the excavator, the date the excavator was brought into the country, the registration number of the excavator, the chassis number, the purposes for which the excavator was brought into the country, the area where the excavator is expected to be used, the name and particulars of the current operator and or user of the excavator, and any other particulars the MMDA may deem necessary. And that's what I've been discussing with my guest this morning. Well, coming up shortly, Invasion. It's Ghana Invasion 2022 with Senior Prophet Omoto Fufean. It sounds wild, but what is this all about? Well, I've got my guest on standby to talk more on this Tuesday.